For our political panel to join us on largely domestic matters, it must be said, Nationals MP Michael McCormack is joining us, and from Perth, Labor's Josh Wilson. Welcome to both of you. And why don't we go to a part of our land, Michael McCormack, which neither of you inhabit regularly. That is South Australia. You're looking at figures there, quite phenomenal swings really across the board, 7% towards the Labor Party. This is going to send a shiver down your spine and those of your Liberal cousins, won't it, with a federal election looming within weeks?
Well, Greg, and hello, Josh, as well, but this was an election fought on state issues. Let's not forget that Peter Malinauskas, and I texted him and wished him my congratulations and wished him all the very best for the future. But let's face it, there was a big push for ambulance services. That was one of the major issues that Peter and his Labor team pushed, and they were very much state focused. And whilst I appreciate that the state electorate has spoken as such, South Australia has moved to a new government. I want to wish Stephen Marshall all the very best too. He's led a very stable government, and I worked closely with him and Corey Wingard to build a better South Australia, and certainly the infrastructure in South Australia now is infinitely better than what it was before Stephen took over. Right,
but they must have missed something, because you don't get swings of this size, Michael, without something going unrecognised or addressed. And I'm going to put to you, one of the factors that has been conveyed by people from both sides is cost of living. It seems almost universal as a concern that politicians are picking up. The same would apply and would be crying out to be addressed, won't it, federally?
Well, that's why our COVID care subsidy for the average family with two children in childcare, they're going to be $3,000, in fact, better off. Under the policies that we've put in place. We've cut taxes. Electricity prices, which doubled under Labor, are now 8% cheaper under a Liberal Nationals government.
So time for a cash
we
handout,
are very much addressing...
Maybe would that address even more than the litany of policies that I'm sure you could recite? What about a cash handout? All signs seem to be that...
Well, I'm not going to foretell or forecast anything that Josh Frydenberg might have in the upcoming budget. That is very much the Treasurer's remit and the Treasurer's role. I know they've been working very hard through the Expenditure Review Committee to make sure that there's always downward pressure on cost of living expenses. I appreciate that because of the Ukraine war, the invasion, that fuel prices have escalated. I understand full well just how much this is having an impact on family budgets, and that's why we are very much working hard to put downward pressure via taxes, because we believe always, as Liberals and as Nationals, that the more of the money that you earn should be in your pocket and you should be able to spend it the way you wish to.
All right, well, let's give it a week, just over a week, and we might have a better idea. Josh Wilson, winners are grinners, I suppose, but here's one for you. Is Anthony Albanese Peter... Malinauskas, sorry, mate, mangling the pronunciation. Is Anthony Albanese, sorry, Josh, exhibiting the same qualities and leadership attraction that seem to be at large in South Australia?
Oh, thanks, Greg, and hi, Michael. Look, the people of South Australia have chosen to elect a forward-looking, competent, focused government, and that heartens me because it's good for South Australia, and it heartens me because I think that's the proposition that we're making as an alternative government under Anthony Albanese's leadership. The people of South Australia chose a new government that is going to focus on the things that we share. They are the most important things like public health and public education and community infrastructure. That's the same approach that we're putting forward.
You don't think the charisma and sort of fresh-faced identity of the leader in Peter Malinauskas' case was a compelling factor for voters?
Well, I think that the speech that Peter Malinauskas, who I take this opportunity to congratulate, the speech that he gave when it was clear that he had been elected as South Australia's 47th Premier, said it all. It was a speech full of substance, but the tone of it was important as well. he spoke to the fact that what we need in Australia at this time, when we've got some very significant challenges, is we need focused, competent government that is constructive, that is united, that doesn't want to play political games, that isn't going to get tied down in rorts and scandal and waste and infighting and those kinds of things, that is going to do its job as the servants of the people. And I think that tone that Peter expressed on the night is very similar to what we are expressing as part of the federal opposition under Anthony Albanese.
Well, Michael McCormack, I think I heard Mark Butler sharing some research this morning on the radio that suggested Labor were picking up loud and clear in the state of South Australia that Scott Morrison was a factor for voters, sitting underneath some of their concerns. So I suppose to twist the question that
But Mark would
just
say
put
that he's
to
from
Josh.
South Australia, and I also heard one of the commentators yesterday suggest that Peter Malinauskas was some sort of Kennedy-type politician. Well, I think that might be a little bit premature. I played the cricket grand final on Saturday and got a duck, and somebody suggested that I should do a Bradman and maybe retire at 57. Comparisons between Michael McCormack and Donald Bradman are a little bit premature too. So
maybe a little exaggerated.
He's got a.
It would be Elvis for you, Michael, wouldn't it?
And of course, always believe what Labor does, not what Labor says it's going to do. I think that's the important distinction there.
All right, Josh, just to round that out, I want to move you on to some other factors. You offered a cheap jibe there. We may not have fully heard.
No, well, certainly not a
hear
cheap.
it, probably, thank goodness.
Not a cheap jibe, Greg. I was inviting Michael perhaps to give us a touch of his Elvis impersonation, which is very good.
Okay, all right, Elvis.
No suspicious minds here.
Elvis rather than Don Bradman, whichever way you cut it. Why don't we take it to Ukraine now? And Josh Wilson, this reporting of an attempt to try and find some sort of compromise comes at around the time that Australia and other allies are barrelling in yet more support. More lethal aid was offered over the weekend, and a shipment of coal too. Do you get any sense that a ceasefire or an end, a permanent truce, are in the offing here?
Well, I'd like to think so. I think that's what we would all hope for. It's to express a view as to how likely that is something I'd probably leave to the experts. But we certainly want to see an end to the violence and the hostilities that are tearing Ukraine apart. It's an unconscionable war that we are seeing, and a very dangerous moment for the world more broadly. I think everything that Australia can do to support Ukraine and to argue for a cessation of hostilities and a return to the sovereignty of Ukraine for the Ukrainian people is welcome. And we've been very supportive of what the government has been doing in offering that assistance.
No, you have been throughout. I'm not suggesting there's any difference between you. Michael McCormack, another element of that was a shipment of coal to Ukraine. Is this something you'd like to see continue, if necessary, to satisfy their energy needs?
Well, indeed, we've got the cleanest coal in the world, and if they need that for their power plants, if they need that for their energy sources, then we've been happy to provide it, as well as, of course, humanitarian aid to the value of around $30 million. And as Josh says, the crisis there is of unimaginable impact on the Ukrainian citizens. 4.5 million are already displaced, and there should not be a cigarette paper between the coalition and Labor in our support for the Ukrainian people. And I thank Josh for his comments there.
Josh, did you find anything striking or remarkable in any way when the Prime Minister was in Western Australia last week? He somewhat dialed up his language towards China and suggested that consequences, which we take to mean sanctions, could come its way if the West, in a united sense, felt that was necessary to harden China's resolve against this conflict. As a West Australian, rich in iron ore and dependent on it, does that cause you any misgivings? No,
I mean, I think that the statement of position from any serious person in Australia is a pretty clear one, that we utterly reject what Russia is engaged in, and if any country, including China, was to take steps that were supportive of what Russia is engaged in, then they would be treated accordingly by the international community, and Australia would be part of that. So I think that's actually a sort of a statement of the obvious. And what we need is we need all countries to be making their views known about the unacceptability of what Russia has set out to do and is doing, and also all countries looking at every way both to support Ukraine and to argue and bring influence to bear to end the current hostilities and get Russia out of Ukraine and return Ukraine to its properly elected government and to its people.
Yeah, I mean, that is a statement of principles, but Michael McCormack, can you imagine what pain economically might be inflicted on the world, let alone Australia, if those sort of sanctions ever came to pass?
Well, China's our largest trading partner, and of course we've been mindful of the fact that many of our farmers, and I live in an agricultural...
Oops, we might have just had an interruption to our line with... Michael, I think we'll see if we can re-establish that and maybe just continue a bit of a chat with you. Josh, I think you've been keeping your eye on another announcement that the Prime Minister, or the federal government more broadly, announced today, $60 million to improve recycling of soft plastics. That would be a worthy objective in anyone's books, and I think something that you actually keep an eye on in your own shadow portfolio.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we need to do much better when it comes to plastic waste. We're not doing very well at the moment. A developed country like Australia, we barely manage to recycle 10% of plastics, and we're seeing more and more of it accumulate in our oceans and end up on our coasts. It's not sustainable economically to use materials once and then throw them away and then see them become fugitive and harmful in the environment.
We've got a long way to go though, don't we?
We've got a long, long way to go, and the difficulty I have with the government's announcement is that, nearly 3 years ago, at the beginning of this term, the Prime Minister took to the world stage and said that we were going to be a leader when it came to ocean plastics. Here we are, it's 5 minutes to midnight, and there's an announcement of some funding for infrastructure that could have been looked at a long time ago. The facts on this issue do not lie. The facts are that over the last 3 years, plastic waste has increased, plastic recycling rates have fallen, and the incorporation of recycled material in plastic packaging has fallen as well. And over the summer, the government was running this ad that I think runs to this day, referring to a remade in Australia a logo and label that doesn't even exist. Now that's a $20 million campaign paid for with taxpayers' funds that is essentially just a piece of propaganda. I mean, we have a problem. The government needs to do something about it. All
right, well, we might get to hear more on that. You can debate it through the course of the campaign. We did briefly get Michael McCormack back on a wobbly connection. I know it fell over, Michael, but we're probably not going to have time now to entertain any further contributions from you. But since we've got you, we're going to thank you and say farewell. Michael McCormack joining us. Thanks for your persistence. And Josh Wilson is from Perth. Thanks to both.